Mojave Desert like a Scirocco, blazing across the land, into your town, into your home, slamming into your radio like a supercharged nanoparticle of unobtainium. Greetings to all of you from the boldest, bawdiest, most outrageous city in the world, the planetary capital of sun, fun, sin, sex, and secrets, my not-so-humble hometown, Las Vegas, Nevada. My name is George Knapp, your occasional host, designated driver of the airwaves, and moderator of tonight's upcoming cacophony of conversation. Of course, this is not my normal spot in the coast-to-coast rotation. I am in tonight for my colleague and friend George Norrie, and very glad to be back with you once again. You know, as listeners know, we cover the gamut of unusual experiences and encounters on this program. And on the credibility scale, the stories we hear range from the unsettling to the unbelievable, and I mean that in a literal sense. We've often discussed the issue of disclosure, our need to know the truth. And I think most of the Coast faithful are of a mind that we're ready for the truth, whatever that truth might be. But it's one thing to have an academic discussion about weird, ethereal matters in the comfort of your own home. It's quite another to stare it right in the face, to fight it, and then to fight the terrible personal consequences that inevitably follow when someone has the guts to step forward and tell the world about their unusual experiences. What would you do if you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's dark, it's cold, you're miles from any kind of help, basically defenseless, and you're confronted by something from beyond, strange beings, technology so advanced it might as well be magic? Would you stand or would you run? Tonight we'll hear from some people who've had to make that choice. The Travis Walton case is probably the best documented but still the most controversial example of what we would call alien abduction. Those of you who follow the subject closely surely know about the incident back in November 1975, at least in the broad strokes, and you've undoubtedly formed an opinion about its veracity. Those of you who simply can't swallow the whole alien abduction scenario, who find it preposterous on its face, will have a chance tonight to hear chilling first-hand accounts from men whose personal veracity and motives have been put through the ringer of public opinion and scrutiny. Is there proof? Is there evidence, reliable testimony to prove this stuff? If ever there was a case that could lend credence to this disturbing narrative, this is it. I am joined tonight by Travis Walton, whose strange tale became a best-selling book and a hit movie, but who's paid a terrible price in his personal life for having the courage to come forward and to stick to his guns. Joining Travis for the duration of the program is Steve Pierce, who was part of the same logging crew on that night back in 1975, the night that Travis disappeared. Later in the interview, we'll be joined by another member of that crew, a guy who really doesn't like to speak about it publicly, in part because for a time he was suspected of murdering Travis Walton and faced the very real possibility of prosecution and imprisonment. And helping us to understand the big picture of the alien abduction scenario is hypnotherapist Yvonne Smith, who has worked with hundreds of people who've reported their own encounters with the unknown and who's gotten to know Travis Walton a bit over the past couple of years. You know, this is the kind of show that goes to the heart of what Coast to Coast is all about. So if you've been hankering for a slab of red paranormal meat, your wait is over. As always, webmaster Tim Binal and I have put together a collection of news items and oddities from the past few days. It's posted on the Coast to Coast website under Knapp's News, including a couple of stories that directly correspond to the subject of tonight's conversation. I'll have more to say about some of these items a bit later, time permitting. For now, though, put on a pot of joe, move a bit closer to the campfire, and prepare yourselves for one heck of a coast-to-coast ride. Fire in the Sky, the Travis Walton story. We begin right after this. I'm George Knapp, and this is the one and only Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. I'm George Knapp, in tonight for George Norrie. I should mention the music you're going to be hearing tonight as we go to breaks or return from breaks was selected by Nathan and I as a way to sort of help set the stage. It's kind of like a musical time machine. These are songs that'll take us back to 1975 when the principal events in this story unfolded. Songs that were playing around that time, and a few from groups that Travis and his pals have said were on their regular playlists back then. Hope you like our selections. You know, after searching these music lists to prepare for the show for that year, it turns out 1975 was one heck of a year for music. You know, even within ufology, the Travis Walton experience was controversial right from the beginning. If it was true, it confronted UFO researchers with the most unpleasant reality. the strong indication that these visitors, wherever they were from, were not merely benign space tourists, mere lights in the sky sent for our enjoyment or amusement, but real beings whose intentions were mysterious and apparently anything but benign. Now, I searched through my library today in preparation for the program, kind of to see what other respected researchers had written about the Travis Walton case over the years. The gold standard for me, as I've mentioned before on the program, includes two names. Jacques Vallée, who wrote that he met with Walton and others and feels they were telling the truth, and Jerry Clark, who wrote this in his massive encyclopedia, one of the best UFO books ever written. It's called the UFO Book. He said, in the end, how one views the Walton controversy depends on how one feels about UFOs in general, and alien abduction claims in particular. If one believes it's possible that UFOs exist as piloted extraterrestrial vehicles, one can accept that Travis Walton boarded a spacecraft and interacted with its occupants. If one believes such things are not possible, one has little choice but to insist that a heretofore undetected hoax scheme underlies the claim. Nearly all of the available evidence, Jerry Clark says, would lead one to the conclusion that Walton, his family, and the logging crew are not hoaxsters. If there's compelling evidence to the contrary, it has yet to emerge. Travis Walton, it is great to have you on the program. I know you've been here before, and the audience should know that you and I have communicated from time to time from afar over the years, but I've never had the pleasure of interviewing you. I'm very glad to have you here, and I hope we can explore areas that are not too repetitive for you.
Well, thanks for having me.
You there? Travis?
Yes, I said thanks
Talk
for
to
having me, George. It's good to be with you.
I am hoping that Travis has just gone away from the phone for a second here. Steve Pierce, you and I have not spoken before, but I understand you're not all that fond of granting interviews yourself, and for very good reason. Very much appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Is Steve there?
Yeah, I'm here.
For some reason, I am unable to hear our guests. Yvonne Smith, you founded an organization known as CERO, Close Encounters Resource Organization, and you've worked with hundreds of people to help them through situations akin to post-traumatic stress disorder. It certainly fits. It's been a lot of years since I've seen you, but I'm very glad to have you here and joining us tonight. And then later in the show, we're going to be joined by another member of the logging crew. Yvonne, are you there?
Yes, George, can you hear me?
This is going to be a problem because I'm not able to hear any of our guests. So I'm going to go ahead and talk to Yvonne and hope we can get this worked out. Yvonne, help me, at least for the listeners, since I can't hear you, help me set the stage. Characterize the Travis Walton case in the abstract, where it ranks in the annals of ufology, and why it deserves our attention so many years later.
Oh, my gosh. Are you able to hear me, George? Okay, maybe not. The Travis Walton case is considered, as we mentioned before, one of the most documented, well-documented cases, unprecedented because of the witnesses that he had with him that night that he was taken. And I'm very, very happy to know that we have two of them with us tonight. And the fact that all of them, all the witnesses, including Travis, all passed a lie detector test. And so this is historical. And even though it occurred back in 1975, this case is discussed, I think, more than any of the other cases that we've researched over the years. I've been doing my work now for 21 years, and it is always important and exciting at the same time as a researcher when we have cases with multiple witnesses. I wrote about two of them in my first book, Chosen, people that were that experienced double abductions. But again, the Travis Walton case is very unique and is set apart from many of the other cases that were written about and discussed. So I'm very excited, and thank you so much for having me on the show tonight. And George.
Yvonne, I'm still unable to hear you, so I'm just kind of winging it from this end. I'll ask you one other question and hope that we can get this technical problem solved. But
Okay.
you know, you don't hear many cases like the Walton experience. Not many like it in history. Are there any that are like it? And do you have similar tales told? Anything even leading up close to this that are told by the people you work with now?
Well, you know, as I mentioned before, the Walton case is very unique because of the number of people that were involved, the witnesses that were there in the truck as Walton exited the truck, was standing underneath the object, and these people that were in the truck actually witnessed the beam coming down and hitting Travis. And I had the opportunity to meet with Steve Pierce last week. We had Travis and Steve Pierce as our guest speakers at our 20th anniversary of my support group, Close Encounter Resource Organization. And when I stop and think about you know, what these people went through, we do have several double abduction cases and some with multiple witnesses. I'm writing about one right now, which I will be publishing in a few months, about a case that involves about a dozen people. But again, they were not the type of witnesses where they actually saw someone being taken from their hotel room, in other words, and being zapped by the bright beam of light. So really, you know, Travis's case is extremely unique, and I know that, you know, people that, as you mentioned, Jerry Clark and Jacques Vallée, you know, well-respected researchers, have come forward and have stated that Travis and his crew did not hoax this case. It's you know, extremely important.
Travis Walton, can you tell us what your life is like now? I mean, I'm reading the book, rereading the book in preparation for this interview. I know you were 22 years old, I guess, in 1975. I would guess that the life of a logger it's not a real long career. What you're doing now, what you do in your life, how you're doing? And again, I apologize, but I'm not able to hear you, your answer, so I'm going to ask Nathan to let me know when you're finished responding.
Well, you know, I did return to work in the woods for a period of time after the incident happened. You know, it's just one of those things where, you know, you get thrown off the horse, and you got to get back to do. But I eventually left that line of work and went to work at the molding mill for like 6 years or so, and then moved on to the paper mill where I worked there for another 11 years. And then I took retirement from there about 3 years ago, and been busy catching up with all the things that I wasn't getting done while I was working too much overtime.
Hey, I'm pleased to tell you that I can now hear you. I'm also hearing my voice in my head, but glad that I can tune into the program. There's a story in your book about an encounter you had with a bear, and there are some other references to encounters with rattlesnakes when you were a young man. And I think those stories kind of give us insight into why you reacted as you did when you saw this object out in the forest, running right at it. And I know that a lot of people have criticized your story, saying nobody would run right at a flying saucer. But this story about the bear sort of gives us a clue about what was to come.
Yeah, you know, I had a lot of, unconventional behaviors that I engaged in those days. There were wild horses up there on that area at the time. As a matter of fact, they're still there.
Well, don't tell the BLM. They'll come and grab them.
I had a plan to try to rope some of these, and that was a kind of a half-baked idea. You know, had I actually succeeded in getting that lasso around one of the horses, I would have been in big trouble. So.
But you ran at this bear, right?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't all that. The bear was already scared by the truck, and so it was just kind of a little bit of a. I'm definitely not like that.
There's a reference, too, in the book I mentioned about rattlesnakes where you say that there was a day when you see one, you would shoot it, but you changed after your experience. Explain that change and how it has manifested itself in your life in other ways.
Well, I know that I've made that sort of a change, but I can't really explain it, It's just kind of a general maturity. I don't know, just a more reasonable approach to things. I don't know. I wouldn't really connect that directly to the incident, but, just overall, just taking a bit more sensible, a little more cautious approach to this.
Steve, I want to bring you into the conversation. I'm kind of curious about the kinds of pressures that you have faced, and I'm familiar with some of them, but I don't know all of them. And I wonder, among the pressures you've had, have you ever been asked to retract the story or offered money or threatened to tell something different?
I've been offered money I was offered $10,000 to say it was a hoax.
Can you tell us who offered that?
Philip Class.
No kidding. Well, we'll get into Philip Class, but, he came flat out to say, I'll give you $10,000 if you'll recant the story.
The first time I heard about him, I had a police officer come to my door, and he said Philip Class said he'd give me $10,000 if I said it was a hoax.
What about other kinds of pressures? Any threats?
On what do you mean, threats?
Well, like, hey,
No.
We'll put you away. We'll embarrass you. We'll put you behind bars.
He did follow me to another state, and he bugged me for a long time. To say it was a hoax.
At this point in your life, is it the kind of thing you wish had never happened, or after having years to think about it, it's a good thing?
Now I'm glad it happened. Sorry, Travis.
Well, I'm not, Steve, but
Travis, you're not.
No.
After all you've been through.
After all I've been through, in order to cope with any difficult thing in life, you got to kind of look for the good in it, and try to view the glass as half full instead of half empty. But all in all, I'd still rather it never happened. All in all, a net negative.
Well, that doesn't go along with the scenario that people have, especially the skeptics, that all you UFO people make tons of money and you live in big houses and you just make stuff up so you can make movies and books and things of that sort.
Well, having had this happen, has cost me dearly in many ways other than material. It derailed my life. It really never truly got back.
But you are talking about it more freely than you used to. Am I correct in that?
That's true. I toyed with the idea many times over the years of just walking away from it and refusing to talk about it ever again. But I've gradually come to realize that along with the burden comes a great responsibility. And much as I don't like to, I think it's important to try to get this information out. I think it serves a purpose.
There was a section in your book where you wrote this. You said, I've come to realize the biggest problem anywhere in the world is that people's perceptions of reality are compulsively filtered through the screening mesh of what they want and do not want to be true. People see what they expect to see. Preconceptions seem to determine judgment of everything. It's not solely because this human failing played such a big part in the experiences I recount here that I consider it so important in the overall scheme of things. If you look, you'll find this human proclivity at the root of every single personal problem or social ill humanity has ever endured. Still believe that?
Yeah, I do. And, it's particularly true of skeptics, not just the self-proclaimed, media skeptics, but anybody who's negative about this situation or about this information, because it seems that for certain people with a certain mindset, no amount of evidence or no amount of proof is going to budge them one bit. They seem to be unaffected by the facts of it.
Well, we're going to get into the facts right after this break. ELO, Strange Magic from 1975, taking us into the break. Travis Walton, Yvonne Smith, and Steve Pierce joining me to talk about an amazing experience, and we get into the specifics right after this. Travis Walton was welcomed into a machine the likes of which he had never seen before, and maybe few people anywhere have seen before. It was an amazing encounter that led to a massive manhunt, suspicions of murder, recriminations for Travis and his family and his friends. Maybe what happened after his encounter with these unknown beings was far worse and left far deeper scars than what happened on board this craft. But when we come back, we're going to get into the specifics of what happened on board and what was going on the ground at the same time. Stay with us, everyone. Coast to Coast AM. We'll be right back. All right, I hope we have our technical difficulties behind us and everyone's here and that we can all hear each other. Travis, why don't we, I know you told the story many times before, but for the benefit of those listeners not familiar with it, can you tell it one more time? What happened on the night of in November 1975? You and your 6 friends are out just finishing up a long day's work. What do you see?
Well, we were going home. It was starting to get dark, and we noticed a glow coming through the trees. Definitely out of place in the woods, and it was rather puzzling at first because we were only getting glimmers through the trees. But when we finally burst into the clearing where we had an unobstructed view of this thing, it was just unmistakable. Less than 100 feet away, a metallic disc outlined in the sky, hovering there. One of the crew members, Alan, just yells out, "Spaceship." And I don't think a single member of the crew was thinking, "Oh, I wonder what that could be." I mean, everybody knew. It was unmistakable. This was not some hazy ball of light off in the distance. It was just there, plain as day, and very, awe-inspiring. Just totally stunning in the visual impact. I immediately threw open the door and started towards it, but, it wasn't like I really intended to get close to it. I was thinking it would actually take off before I got that close. And
Were you kind of drawn to it?
Well, Alan was saying in one interview that he thought it looked to him like I was, just under some sort of hypnotic control. Steve, he does that habit stuff. But, from my point of view, it just felt to me like I was, acting of my own accord. But then, of course, if they do have the ability to control what we do, they could probably also make us believe it was our idea. But nevertheless, to me, I was just, eager to see it up close, or closer, and thinking that it would probably take off before I got right all the way up to it. So I was moving quickly at first, and then once I saw that it wasn't going anywhere, I slowed way down. And the guys in the truck were yelling at me to get back in the truck, get away from there.
And could you hear them now that you think back to it?
Yeah, I could hear them. They were swearing at me and saying some uncomplimentary things about what I was doing. And, I was really, I was definitely, coming face to face with the idea that this is a bad idea. But I guess I live to regret it. When I got up close and I was looking up at it, it was just amazing. The perfection and grandeur and the power of it was just astonishing. Hovering there. But the sound it made suddenly got louder and started to move. And so I dove for cover. I got down behind the end of the log, and, the crew's, that I get out of there was really, increasing their anxiety as well as my own. So, without even, regardless of their insistence, I had made up my mind that I wanted to get the heck out of there. But I was kind of torn between staying undercover there behind the log and getting the heck away from there and getting back in the truck. So I decided to make a run for it. But when I straightened up to run back to the truck, that's when it hit me.
This beam.
Yes, the energy felt like a physical blow, like I just been, hit by a truck that I didn't see coming. It had a sort of a numbing, sort of a electrical shock sort of feeling. And, Dwayne Smith, who later became an electrician, said to him it sounded like electricity, that it actually made a noise that they heard. But I didn't see or hear it, actually. It was just instant knockout.
Were you conscious? You were knocked out, literally knocked out.
Yeah, and, I've been saying that they said that it knocked me back through the air 10 or 15 feet, but, Steve said it was closer to 20 feet. And the way that I landed without protecting myself, they immediately started yelling among themselves that it had killed me, that I had died. And, they were wise to assume that they might be next. So, they wanted to take off.
Let's get Steve to interject here for a second, and we'll come right back, Travis. Steve, describe the scenario inside the truck. You're all going crazy saying, what are you doing, Travis? You must be out of your mind.
Well, everybody's hollering, and I'm just sitting there looking, and when Travis jumps out, he goes up there and then starts making a weird noise, and then the blue green light came out and zapped him. I said they got him, and that's when we took off.
Thinking back at it, I mean, that's sort of a critical moment there. There's your friend and your coworker out there. You think he's dead. You're getting out of there. I mean, do you regret?
Well, I didn't know Mike was taking off. I had my head kind of like out the window looking, and then as soon as I say they got him, I felt my head jerk back, and we started the truck just started taking off, and I was just bouncing all over the truck. It took me a couple of minutes to realize we were going down the road.
The description of the beam that Travis just related, describe it from your vantage point.
It was a bluish green light, and it lit up the whole sky, but you couldn't see nothing. I mean, the whole sky lit up, but you still couldn't see the trees, and it was so bright. I mean, it was bright.
So you figure Travis is dead. You go jamming down the road and go a little ways, and then at least somebody, I guess, realizes, hey, we need to go back.
Well, we get down the road, and we all stop, and we get out. And as soon as we get out, we seen it take off. And we start to talking about, should we go back and get him? And I think it was Dwayne Smith said, I think he was incinerated, and I said, no, I seen him hit the ground, he did hit the ground. So we all decided to go back and turn around and look for him. And so we went back and looked for him. We couldn't find him. We looked everywhere. And that's when we went into Heber and called the police department.
We'll come back to that part of the story. Travis, how long do you think were you taken on board, you think, right away, or you have no idea?
Well, according to what the crew said, they weren't gone that long, so it must have been fairly immediately. And, and probably with good reason. At the time, I accept the terminology abduction, kind of a forceful, a kidnapping. But it's only in more recent years that I've come to think that maybe that whole scenario isn't real accurate. That maybe, what really happened there was that when I stood up, at that moment, my upper body was closest thing to this craft. And if there was some kind of charge building up, some of the guys said that it was just some kind of a discharge as a side effect of it powering up to move away like that, then perhaps it hit me and injured me in a way where it was necessary to bring me on board to fix the situation. The nearest hospital in those days was either Payson or Sholo, which would have been well over an hour. And, you know, if I was in cardiac arrest, something needed to be done.
Had you? I know in reading your book that you had a lot of different kinds of interests. You and Mike would debate different kinds of subjects, academic sort of subjects. It sounded like you did a lot of reading on a broad variety of topics. Had you ever read UFO books? Were you into this stuff? Because I asked the question because, as you know, some of the skeptics said, well, he must have seen a movie that aired about Betty and Barney Hill, or he read the story, and that's where all this came from.
Well, you know, we did have a wide variety of interest, and, you know, the subject had come up because there was an article in the paper about cattle mutilations. But, you know, it was not any kind of a fixation or obsession, you know, and that's the implication. That's what they're trying to suggest, that this was a big thing with us, and it wasn't. It was just one of many interests or, you know, topics that come up. Heck, there's probably no one who hasn't discussed the subject to some degree. So it's only in hindsight that people point to stuff like that and go, when it really doesn't mean anything.
Yvonne, it's so hard figuring out the truth from fiction in these kind of encounter stories. Not to say that Travis's is like any other one, but the research that you've done into screen memories, for example, where the abductors create a scenario where they look much different from maybe what they actually do resemble. They can appear as an owl or a deer or something like that, and even implant other kinds of memories. I would imagine it's difficult to say that what Travis is describing is literally true.
You mean from
what he sees? Yeah, what comes next when we're going to get into talking about the beings that he encountered on board and the experiences on board?
Yeah, well, certainly, George, the alien beings can implant so many different scenarios in someone's mind where they will think, I have cases where people are driving down the highway and they encounter these blinking lights thinking that they're approaching an accident scene. And that turns out to be a screen memory for, prior to an abduction. And as you mentioned, of course, seeing deer close up, seeing owls are very, very common. Many people that I have worked with have a fear of owls. So I'm familiar with Travis's case. We were discussing this just the other night at dinner about, when he awoke on the craft and he encountered, I believe he had said, 3 beings that were there in the room with him. Now, are you talking about, George, that could be a screen memory, or?
Yeah, I mean, does he really know what they look like? And I don't want to. I want to come to him and get his opinion on that as well. But you, in general, you deal with a lot of this stuff. It's hard to separate what's real and what isn't.
Well, at times it is, and that's where we have to be very, very careful. Those of us who are researching this very strange, phenomenon. But we have had. I've been doing this 21 years now, George, and my colleagues, the late Bud Hopkins, my mentor, and Dr. David Jacobs, and then the late Dr. John Mack. I've worked with all of them, and in discussing our cases and comparing notes of the descriptions of alien beings and how people are taken, how they're abducted. We do now have been able to draw from all the similarities from hundreds upon hundreds of cases. So we're pretty confident on what certain types of alien beings look like. We know that the small ones that they call grays, with the large eyes, the small ones seem to be the abductors. They're the ones that are responsible for taking a person out of their natural environment and bringing them onto the craft. Then once they're on the craft, they encounter many different types working together. The taller ones that look like the small little grays, but they're taller. They seem to be more in charge. I mean, there definitely is a chain of command when someone is taken on board, let's say on board a spacecraft, a UFO. But, you know, we're just scratching the surface here. You know, there's so much that we need to study because, I mean, from the beings that have been encountered by, you know, thousands, millions of cases, we're talking worldwide. This is a worldwide phenomenon. There has to be, you know, just as many different types of, you know, alien beings, different species, different types. So from what the description, well, of course, we'll let Travis, you know, describe what he encountered. I found that description is very common.
Travis, let's go back to you. Can you describe, I let you sort of skim over what the craft looked like. I mean, you described it as magical and amazing. How big it was, and then what you saw, your first memory of being inside of it when you woke up.
You know, George, on the subject of, you know, this...
screen memory stuff?
These altered memory sort of thing. You know, Ken, one of the crewmen was saying, well, this really happening, you know, kind of a thing. It was anytime we're confronted with some really astounding event, you know, everybody does some reality testing, you know. Is a kind of a pinch me kind of a thing, you know. Is this a dream? You know, is this really happening? And you know, at the extreme, you know, I went through all of those kind of things in my thinking, especially before I, you know, had the corroboration of, you know, making, you know, reuniting with the crew to some extent, and you know, who had seen what I'd seen. So, you know, while they were trying to persuade me that, you know, that I'd been hit on the head, somehow I had some delusion of some kind, and there was a variety of theories thrown out there. I was doing some reality testing. So, you know, if you carry that to the extreme, you know, what do you really know for sure? You know, dream I'm a butterfly, or am I really a butterfly dreaming I'm a man? All those kind of philosophical questions, you know. Could this whole thing have just been some gigantic government mind control experiment? But what I recall, there are no internal inconsistencies. So if it was any kind of a thing where there was an alternate or a true reality beyond my perception, it was 100% effective because everything jived with this is what was happening.
The craft itself.
Metallic disc.
I'll tell you what, Travis, I shouldn't ask you that. I hear music. It's going to the break. When we come back, I want you to describe the outside and then that moment when you wake up and you're inside this thing and what you see. Stay with us, everyone. Travis Walton, Yvonne Smith, Steve Pierce, talking about one of the most unusual and close encounter experiences of all time here on Coast to Coast AM. Our discussion with Travis Walton and Yvonne Smith and Steve Pierce about an incident well known as Fire in the Sky, the abduction of Travis Walton in 1975, and the terrible consequences for his friends back on the ground. He was gone for 5 days, had some incredible experiences on board the ship that we'll get into in a moment. And on the ground, though, his friends were suspected of killing him. And then even after he returned, they were put through all kinds of hell by the law, by the media, and in particular by the UFO community, which was deeply divided back then and pulled some really sneaky stuff. When we come back, we get into the meat of this story, what Travis Walton saw on board that craft. Stay with us, everyone, on Coast to Coast AM. Travis Walton, before the break, I was asking you to describe the exterior of the craft. You had said it was absolutely beautiful and stunning. How big was it?
It wasn't huge, you know. In the woods, there's no, you know, common objects to compare it to for a reference, but, you know, it was probably at the most 25 feet in diameter. But a very imposing sight and totally distinct. The skeptic suggestions that what we really saw was the
Jupiter.
ball lightning or the planet Jupiter is just absurd.
Jupiter. It's not Jupiter, I guess, if it's hovering right over the ground where you're standing.
Yeah, it was close enough that we could have hit it with a rock from the truck. So
I guess a lot of people have done that with mixed results over the years.
through rocks, I don't think I'd want to try that.
Well, yeah, I think they've shot BB guns and 22s at craft as well. I don't think that's a good idea either.
No, I wouldn't advise it. But
All right.
I got out and went closer, and you know it was metallic. Parts of it were glowing, and it was basically, you know, like two pie pans put lip to lip, a disc, sort of angular, but very, very distinct in what we were seeing.
I know you're not a physicist or an engineer, but I'll bet that in the years since that you've talked to physicists and engineers about propulsion, how it was flying. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I gave a talk to an engineering college in Rapid City, I think it was, and they were very interested in the sound it was making, seeing if they could deduce the method of propulsion from that. They asked some really good questions. I like talking to college students because they always come up with some good stuff.
Well, and they're open to the story, I'll bet.
Yeah, and, you know, ask really intelligent questions. Good audience.
Let's go to the interior of the craft. What do you see when you wake up? I guess you have no idea how long you're out, but what's the first vision that you see?
Well, I was in and out. It was indistinct, you know. I didn't just come to real clearly. It was kind of a period of time there where I'd start to regain consciousness and go back out. But the overpowering sensation of the pain and struggling to breathe and get enough air, you know, this was my main perception at first. And I wasn't able to focus my eyes well. Everything was blurry and even a little double vision. But it was when I finally could focus that I could see this light fixture above me. I could see the metallic surface of the ceiling. But, you know, it was triangular shaped, and that was very strange. But I didn't realize where I was at first. Eventually it came to me that, you know, it came back to me that I had approached this object, but I still was just assuming that I'd been hurt somehow, and the crew had taken me to the hospital. So I thought I was in some kind of medical facility, laying on some kind of gurney or operating table. This device over my chest, you know, my chest really hurt, and so I was afraid to move too much, and, that I might make things worse. But when I finally was able to focus my eyes and saw these creatures standing over me, you know, I realized these weren't doctors. This was, you know, I realized then where I was. Man, was I in trouble.
You're describing it as triangular, but obviously the outside of the craft didn't look like that. It's bigger too than it would appear from the outside.
Yeah, the room I regained consciousness in, the room was shaped triangular, not the interior of the entire craft. It was divided up into various rooms and passages. Very small, cramped, dimly lit. It was hot and humid. And, you know, once I left that craft, it again seemed a lot bigger than what I'd seen in the woods. So, you know, to me, I'm not at all certain it was the same craft. That it may have been some kind of transfer or you know.
That they took you somewhere else.
Yeah.
All right, you're laying on this slab, or like a gurney, and you finally focus and you see some strange beings around you. Walk us through that.
Well, I immediately just flipped out. You know, I was just overcome with fear. I guess you could say I basically went crazy with fear. And I tried to hit them away from me, but I was so weak and had so much trouble moving that it was just more of a push. You know, I don't know if it was because they was like already moving away from me, or maybe they was a lot lighter than I expected, but he just moved easier than I thought he would. And he fell back into the other one, but I, at the same time, was trying to get away from him, so I rolled in the opposite direction, and that thing that they had over my chest fell off, and I was real weak and unsteady on my legs, so I backed away from them, and I just tried to keep my attention just riveted on them, but I bumped up against the shelf behind me, and I just looked real quick to see what was behind me, and I saw all these instruments spread out there, and I just grabbed the biggest object there and started swinging it in their direction to keep them from coming any closer. They weren't close enough to hit, but I was making threatening motions and screaming threats at them, and they did stop. And that point there where they stopped and they were just staring at me was just such a incredibly intense feeling of being like they were, boring into me with their vision in a way that, that was the thing that I had the most nightmares about, was them staring at me like that. Now I'm thinking that maybe the explanation for that was that they were trying at that moment to institute or regain the control over me, and it wasn't working. And, some people speculate that if you really jacked on adrenaline and fear, that can overcome their control. But I'm thinking more likely, that there was some kind of neurological injury that happened when the beam hit me, and that prevented the control. It kind of scrambled my circuit. In the brainwave scan that I had later by the Barrows Neurological Institute did detect an anomaly that might suggest some kind of injury. And that disturbing, weird feeling that I got from their intense gaze may have been just them, trying to move into my mind in a way where they could, calm me down or get me back under, I guess you'd call it, anesthesia of some kind. It wasn't working, and so they decided to, I think, probably just to get the heck away from me before I did some damage.
What did they look like? I mean, we have the idea of what aliens look like now, and it's pretty common from movies and TV and books, but back then I don't think the same image was as well known. But describe what they looked like.
Well, I use the term humanoid, and a lot of people think, oh, well, that means they look like people. But, to me, humanoid just means 2 arms, 2 legs, eyes on the front of the head, 2 eyes in the mouth, and, the kind of an arrangement, but definitely not human. Smaller, so then 4 feet, large, hairless craniums, huge eyes, undersized ears, nose, and mouth. Jaw, the lower part of the face, seemed small and undeveloped. But I didn't detect any distinct emotion, no direct hostility or anything like that. It was just that stare that bothered me so much for some reason.
They're kind of looking at you like, we've got a wild man on our ship here. What are we going to do with him?
Yeah, who knows what they were thinking, because I was pretty out of my mind with fear and doing and reacting and thinking in ways I never would have if it hadn't have been for this losing control like that. And you got to explain this in terms, a lot of people think, well, I would just remain calm and I'd ask all kinds of really cool questions, but if you're really in that situation, especially the situation I was in, dimly lit, very hot, humid, cramped, very small room, in a lot of pain, but more than anything, struggling to get enough air. Nothing causes panic more than the feeling that you're smothering. You know, that's the reason waterboarding is so effective at getting information out of people, is that, you know, nothing's scarier than not being able to breathe. And so I think all those things combined to make me react much worse than I would have had those factors not been in there.
Do you have time to think, like, you know, what ultimately is going to happen to you? Are you thinking these guys are going to kill me, they're going to eat me, they're going to probe me, they're going to, or it's just happening too fast to even think that far?
Yeah, I wasn't doing much thinking. It was kind of an instinctive overreaction, just a kind of a panicked, desperate need to escape somehow, to fight my way past them, get through that doorway that was on the other side of them, and just find a door somewhere and just jump out to the ground, which I was very, you know, foolishly assuming would just be, you know, a few feet below, you know, that this thing was still in the woods, but probably wasn't. Probably a long ways from there.
All right, so describe the sequence of events, how you did get out.
Well, I went looking for a way out. When they took off, I think I, you know, actually scared them away.
So they just walked out of this particular room?
They just, you know, hurried out, and they went in one direction, so I went in the other direction, down this narrow, curving passageway, and it was so tightly curved that I couldn't see very far behind me. I couldn't tell if they were after me. I couldn't see very far ahead of me. Was I running into something worse? But still, knowing that they had gone the other way made me, you know, keep going in that direction. I found a room that I thought might have doors, you know, that would lead out of there. But, you know, later on, piecing together the floor plan as I recalled it, I doubt those doors led to outside the craft. More likely, it was just to another part of the craft. But nevertheless, I was determined to try to open the doors, get out somehow. But, you know, surprising development was that trying to get to those doors revealed that by standing near the center of this room, I was able to view, well, points of light, whether it was actually viewing where the craft was at, and this was just, you know, space I was looking at, or maybe it was just some kind of planetarium-like projection. But anyway, you know, it looked like stars all around me. And when I stood near the center of the room where this chair was, and the reason I approached this chair was because it was the only thing anywhere around there that had any kind of controls or buttons. And I had one thing on my mind: get those doors open and get out of there. Not a real sensible thing. But, in my blind panic, that seemed like the thing I wanted to do. But I was unsuccessful in getting the doors to open, and I did at one point cause the star pattern to move. Not the stars moving relative to each other, but the entire pattern sort of rotating around.
Well, is that the craft moving?
Well, it was. If it was just a map, then it was just moving the map, but it still had a very disorienting effect. You know, I was already kind of unsteady on my feet, but moving all these points of light all around me at one time kind of, you know, upset my balance momentarily. And then I had a little glimmer of common sense come to me that, you know, if these controls actually were moving the craft rather than some kind of map, then what if I crashed? You know, I resolved I wasn't going to mess with that lever anymore. But thinking about pushing some more buttons, and then that's when this human being came in, and I, you know, this is kind of strange to me. You know, I saw two types of beings: these creatures and these people that looked so much like us they even could be from Earth. account after account in news stories or various retellings that I've seen in the media, they just leave that out. Like they're just not comfortable with that. Even the movie did that.
So does this guy just walk in?
Yeah, and he wanted me to go with him, and so I went. I'm screaming all kinds of questions and not getting any answers. But that wasn't all that suspicious to me at first, because he had a helmet on his head, and he might not be able to hear or speak with it on. And so that wasn't so bad. But when he left me with some people who were dressed like him without the helmet, and when they wouldn't answer the question, that's when I had real misgivings about, was this actually a rescue, or was I still in a serious predicament?
You said he looked just like a human. He had this helmet on. How is he communicating? Is his mouth moving, or is he communicating some other way?
No communication. It was the only communication going on was me yelling. And
well, you said he wanted you to go with him. Did he gesture?
Yeah, it was a gesture, and then he took me by the arm and led me. And I wasn't resisting. I didn't feel this was threatening. I viewed this as a rescue, so I went with him, no problem. It was only, when they started trying to get me to lay down on this table and still wouldn't answer any questions, that I started to have serious doubts about, was this a rescue? Now, in hindsight, 35 years later, I think it probably was just an attempt to help. But at that point, it seemed like what they were hiding from me was, maybe bad intentions or something. So I resisted. To no avail. They overpowered me and knocked me out with some sort of a gas mask thing. Looked like an oxygen mask. Next thing I know, and I don't know if that was immediately, but the next thing I did recall was waking up beside the highway in time to see craft take off into the sky.
You said that you thought it was a rescue. Even in hindsight, it might have been a rescue. But the fact that these human-looking things were on the same craft with these other beings sure strongly implies they're working in unison.
Yeah, it does, but I speculated, at the time that it could be that the humans were doing some kind of a forceful intervention and taking me away from them, that it was actually them capturing that ship or something. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you could have the small beings being in charge and these human-looking ones doing the bidding of the others. So there's all I didn't see them together, so I don't know whether it was cooperative or forceful or what. It definitely seemed that the human-looking ones didn't belong on board the craft that I woke up on, because it seemed too small for big people like us.
Well, unbeknownst to you, in between the time when you're taken and when you wake up on the side of the road, 5 days had passed, and all hell is breaking loose for your friends. When we come back, Steve Pierce will help us pick up that story, also be rejoined by Yvonne Smith. I'm talking with Travis Walton about an amazing series of events from 1975. Paul McCartney and Wings taking us into the break. This is Coast to Coast AM. I'm talking with Travis Walton and Steve Pierce about some unusual experiences, unusual is putting it mildly, that they had back in November 1975. Also joined by Yvonne Smith, who's helping us understand the big picture. And at the top of the hour, another member of the logging crew who was there that fateful night, going to be joining us for a rare interview. Certainly rare to have three of those guys together. We're going to get back into the meat of this story and what happened to Travis Walton's buddies on the ground. They were really put through some trials right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Yvonne Smith, a question about sort of the big picture. You mentioned some of your mentors in this field, Bud Hopkins, John Mack, David Jacobs. The research that they have done in the body of what you'd call abduction literature, those guys, the leading lights of this field, would suggest that there is some sort of a connection to genetics, that when abductions happen, it often happens to the same family over many generations, that whoever these visitors are, they follow families. This seems to be sort of an abduction by opportunity, sort of like a crime of opportunity. How unusual is that?
pretty unusual, George. It is very true that abductions do run intergenerational. I mean, we have found that in hundreds of cases. But what happened with Travis and his fellow loggers is very unusual. Now, in having an opportunity, if I have an opportunity to speak to each one of the witnesses, there could be something in the background of perhaps sightings. They've had sightings of craft in the past. Perhaps their family members have had an encounter with the UFO and its occupants. I mean, I don't know the history and the background of all the witnesses, but we'll see when John Goulet comes on. I've not had the opportunity to speak with him. I don't know. Many people, of course, as you know, George, are very reluctant to talk about their experiences and the experiences of their family members. But it could have been where, Travis and the others were at the wrong place at the wrong time. And, and what happened to Travis was just an unfortunate accident.
Yeah, they see, here's this crazy guy out in the woods who has the intestinal fortitude or the lack of marbles to come walk under a flying saucer and sort of challenge us. Might as well pick him up.
Well, exactly. And as Travis has said in the past, and I laugh when he says that, he was a daredevil. He challenged. For somebody to chase a bear, I don't think too many people are going to do that. So, it's just it's a very very unique case, George, and the fact that think about it. I was having dinner with them and speaking to Steve Pierce and had the opportunity to meet him for the first time before they came to the Cyril meeting, and I looked at him and just said, and I looked at Travis, and I said, "Oh my God, Travis, thank goodness you came back, because who knows what could have happened to the rest of the crew. I mean, they could have been convicted and sent to prison for life or worse." It really is an incredible, very unique case in all aspects. But I find it very interesting that, Travis, when he woke up and he saw the small beings that he had just described, that's very common. Of course, back in 1975, they're not as popular as they are now. They're out in the media everywhere. We've come to know and love these little gray beings, but of course it makes my job a little bit more difficult to separate, fact from fantasy. But he also described the human-looking alien beings, and when I first started studying Travis's case many years ago when I first got into this field, and then I started working with my own cases, and these people that my clients were describing these very human-looking beings, and wearing a very tight-fitting blue uniform. I present this in my lecture series where people have still not met in my clientele, and putting the two pieces of artwork together, they are amazingly similar.
Yeah, it's funny to hear skeptics who find it astonishing and ridiculous that aliens could look like humans. Well, gosh, that's ridiculous. Yeah. We know what aliens look like.
Well, of course. I mean, and the skeptics know all, George. Never studied one case. But I thought it was just very interesting, that aspect of Travis's case. And then I came up with, with my caseload. And when I thought I have something very unusual here, I would get together with my colleagues, and we traveled. It was really in the 90s when we did a lot of traveling, lecturing at all these different conferences. And we'd sit there, after the conference was winding down, and you have a couple drinks, and you think, I need to ask this question. And I remember, asking Bud and asking John Mack, what do you think of this? I came across this particular case, and they just sat there and said, oh, yeah, we have plenty, I've got about 30 cases, with the same description. So I knew I was on the right track. I knew that people that I was working with in my own clientele were truly having experiences.
All right, I want to bring Steve Pierce back in. Steve, Yvonne just asked a question about maybe she hadn't talked to you about whether there's family experiences. Are there? Do you or your family have any kind of history of experiences like this?
Yes, before and after.
Yeah.
Well, when we used to live out there in Snowflake, my grandparents lived out in the middle of nowhere out there with no electricity, and you could sit out there at nighttime and watch them fly over this mesa, the lights and stuff. And my mom and aunt and uncle had an experience. My mom says it. Well, my mom denies it. She doesn't believe in UFOs, but and then I've seen them afterwards too, up in the Four Corners area.
Your mom doesn't believe it, and as I understand from reading Travis's book, Fire in the Sky, I mean, the town itself was pretty divided. Why don't you tell us, in those 5 days that it turns out Travis was on that ship, what it was like for you and the other members of the logging crew? You had to call the police, you had to let them know, and what was the reaction, initial and then subsequent?
Well, town didn't believe us. When we called the police, he came out, Gillespie came out there, and he looked for beer bottles. I think he thought we were drunk or something, and he made Mike and two other guys go back with him, and the other three, we went back home. And in my mind, Travis was dead, so I wanted to go home because I didn't want to go out there and, find a dead body. And then the next day, when they put that big old posse together, went back and looked for him, I snuck out the back door so the cops couldn't take me with them because I thought Travis was dead, and they were going to go out there and find a body.
And are you guys thinking, hey, we're going to get charged for this? If he doesn't show up, we're going to get charged.
Oh, yeah, we thought we was going to get charged for murder. The cops were telling us that you don't need a body in Arizona to get convicted for murder. So, yeah, the whole week we thought, before the polygraph test, Alan Dallas's mother was telling us, they're going to rig this polygraph test to make you guys look guilty, and so I figured the polygraph test was going to be rigged too. And the polygraph test was more scarier. That day was more scary than seeing Travis get zapped. I was more scared that day.
So some time goes by. Travis is nowhere to be found. The suspicion starts growing, and they ask you to take a polygraph. And I know from reading the book that it was a subject of some debate whether it was a good idea or not, but eventually you did. And then I guess the polygraph examiner is not giving you many clues about what his findings are, right?
Yeah, they weren't telling us much of anything. I don't think they believed we passed the polygraph test. Because they weren't telling us anything. And when we took the polygraph test, they separated us all, so we couldn't talk to each other. And I was the first one who took the polygraph test.
And you were pretty scared, pretty nervous.
Oh, I was scared to death. I thought we was going to go to jail for murder.
When you finished the test, did the guy say anything to you? You passed, you failed, or didn't say anything at all?
No, they didn't say nothing. They just asked. I think it felt like 2 or 3 hours. All the questions he was asking me, but. No, they didn't say nothing. Not until after they talked to everybody.
And the questions focus on, did you see a UFO? Did you kill Travis? Stuff like that?
The questions, one of them was if we saw a UFO, but most of it was if we did bodily harm to Travis. Do I know anybody of the crew that would, did bodily harm to him, or did I or anybody else did? Or, it was mostly questions about Travis, someone killing Travis or hurting Travis.
Why did you believe that the test had been rigged?
Because I was 17 years old, and I was believing everybody else was telling me.
How quickly did the media arrive? How quickly did the story sort of explode and all kinds of journalists show up?
By the next morning.
Who was the first ones? How did it happen? Were they hounding you?
Yeah, the first one that showed up was National Enquirer.
Well, that makes sense. And did they come knocking on the door? Did they come knocking on the door, or what? What they do?
They came knocking on the door, and a bunch of other magazines came knocking on the door. But I hid after that. I started hiding from everybody.
What about the other guys?
They're in the picture. I'm not in the picture of the money they gave us.
The money? What do you mean?
Well, National Enquirer, I guess, gave us some money, and they're in a picture together, you know, and I'm not in the picture with them.
How much money did National Enquirer give? And I'm assuming that's for not only the picture, but for somebody to tell them the story, right?
Yeah, I really don't remember how much they gave. Travis can answer that question better than I can.
Travis, do you know?
No, I can't remember. It doesn't seem like it was very much, but a lot was made out of that. You know, you know, basically the accusation was, well, they just made up the story for this money, but we didn't even know they had such a thing. I'd never even heard of tabloid before. I didn't know what tabloid meant. I don't even know if they sold those in this little town. You know, they're everywhere. You can't go shopping without seeing them at the checkout counter now. But back then, I don't remember knowing what that was.
So a little more from you, Steve, about the media horde. National Enquirer gets there. What about TV people and other newspapers?
Yeah, other newspapers was there. They chased me down for a long time, even like 6 or 7 months later. In I think it was July, National Star chased me down at the hospital. I was in the hospital all day, and they chased me down. They came to Sholo. Well, the hospital's on the other side of Sholo, but they came all the way over there just to hound me. And I was at the hospital for 2 days.
Are you reading the stories as they're coming out? Are you amazed by what was being written about you and Travis and the other crew members?
Well, see, I didn't know. I got in a semi, and I stayed long haul for years, and I didn't know they made a movie until like '93. I was going in a truck stop, and I was getting fuel, and went in there and paid for the fuel, and I went to the restroom, and I was fixing to head for New Orleans from Barstow, California. And I went to the TV room to see if anybody wanted to ride with me, and there was Travis on HBO, and that's how I knew they made a movie.
Travis, okay, you come back. You're found on the side of the road. You needed some medical attention right off the bat, but you didn't want to go into town, right? You're worried about what the reaction's going to be among and who's going to be peppering you with questions?
Yeah, you know, the family had had a lot of harassment from many different directions, and so the idea was to just get the heck out of Dodge and go to Phoenix and try to get some medical attention there, and that turned out to be, you know, a rather disappointing first effort. These one UFO investigators that, you know, had contacted my brother and suggested that, you know, they could provide, you know, medical testing that was, you know, more recognizing of the special, you know, circumstances surrounding such a thing. That didn't work out at all. But then,
well, back up for a second. This UFO guy comes to town. He tells everybody, "Don't you worry, I'm going to help you get through this." Telling your friends this stuff. Mm-hmm. And among the recommendations is when Travis shows up, he needs medical attention. Go to this doctor in Phoenix. Tell me what you found in Phoenix when you go to see this supposedly credible medical doctor.
He was just basically a quack. I mean, he just was representing himself as a doctor, and then he pushed, and then he changed that to, well, you know, he was actually a medic in the Marine Corps. You know, that's not a doctor. You know, and then in later years he changed that to that it was the Navy rather than the Marine Corps. So it was just totally ridiculous how, you know, somebody with a diploma mill degree making pronouncements about me when, you know, I hadn't been examined or in any way, you know, had any interaction that he could base anything on, just meeting me briefly.
This comes back to bite you, doesn't it? That the fact that you go to see this guy as the first medical professional after your experience?
Yeah, and, you know, the fact that they lost the case because they just, you know, couldn't handle it, they immediately switched from making positive statements to negative statements. I guess it boiled down to that if it's our case, it's a good case, and if it's not our case, it's a bad case. And there was quite a few organizations involved, and it, you know, had a lot to do with rivalry between them, rather than the facts of the matter.
Well, what's the organization? I don't even think it exists anymore. But name the organization that had the case and sent you to this doctor and then turned on you.
Well, that was Ground Saucer Watch, and there was a whole lot of claims, and turned out that the people involved had bogus credentials, had made exaggerated claims about educational background, every one of them. And so they were pretty thoroughly discredited in the long run, but they actually made, a concerted campaign, rather vengefully, trying to attack the case.
I know what your attitude was in later years because of your early experiences there with UFO people and media people. I mean, a lot of people made promises, we're going to tell your story right, and it seems like they all messed with you at one level or another.
Yeah, it turned me into a pretty wary person, I was getting to be more like Steve, not trusting any of them. But did find some people that were reliable and trustworthy, and there are some good investigators out there.
The Lorenzens, did they help you from APRO?
Yeah, and I think Stan Friedman was very good. These are people that actually, made in-person investigations and came to the site or met me and interacted with me. Dr. Heineck was one. But, it seemed like the attackers were the ones who were just, experts from afar. They had no personal contact. And, kind of on that same theme, Phil Klass was making all these attacks, and I was criticizing him for being what I called an armchair investigator. But then I later found out that he made all these in-person efforts, that he never made any effort to, refute my attack on him as an armchair researcher. He actually flies all the way to Texas to take Steve out to dinner and try to bribe him with $10,000. That's not cheap. That's not inexpensive at all. I found out that he flew to Phoenix and had somebody drive him all the way up to the site. Never made a single mention of that in his extensive writings in attacking the case. And I thought it rather odd that he would go to that extent, that kind of expense, and then never even try to use it to refute that he was just, doing everything all over the phone. So that was kind of odd, but it was when the Freedom of Information Act accessed Phil Klass's FBI file that the true smoking gun here came out.
Freedom of Information Act, by the way, was passed that year, 1975. It took a little while, I guess, to get Phil Klass's files, but for those who don't recognize him, he's been gone for a couple of years, but Phil Klass was sort of the arch skeptic, the debunker de jour, the most preeminent UFO debunker of his time. And whenever a prominent case would pop up, suddenly Phil Klass would pop up, attacking the principles. And I guess some of the stuff that he did to you, the implications, insinuations to you and your crew, were pretty nasty.
But pretty libelous. But, oddly, never made any attempt to contact me directly. Not by mail, not by phone, not anything. Really kind of strange.
Travis Walton, Steve Pierce, Yvonne Smith are my guests. We'll be joined by John Goulet in a moment, another member of the crew. This is Willie Nelson's first ever #1 hit from a monster album, Red-Headed Stranger in 1975. Stay with us, everyone. Much more to come here on Coast to Coast AM. And in his very excellent book, Fire in the Sky, Travis Walton mentions that he and his buddies liked the Moody Blues especially. So, Travis, that's for you. The book, of course, is different from the movie. If you've read one and seen the other, you know that there are some significant differences. And the whole crew, Travis Walton and his crew, had some amazing experiences, not entirely unexpected, with the folks in Hollywood. We'll get into that. And we'll hear from John Goulet, another member of the logging crew who doesn't grant many interviews and certainly has never appeared on a radio show with Travis and Steve before, but we'll hear his side of the story right after this on Coast to Coast AM. We're joined now by John Goulet, who was one of the members of the logging crew back there in November 1975 on that fateful night when Travis Walton was beamed aboard or taken aboard a flying saucer. John, thanks for joining us.
Hey, glad to be here, man.
Am I right in saying that you really don't like interviews that much?
Well, I just haven't done them. No, don't really, be honest with you, I really don't like them that much.
Can I ask you this? How often do you think about those experiences? Is it something you try to put out of your head, or do you think about it often?
Well, it is something I tried to put out of my head. I took off kind of wild and just tried to forget about it, but it's something that, every night I'll be looking at the skies, it's something I'll never be able to forget,
A lot of people have attacked you and your friends over the years and said you must have made it up. For a while they suspected, I think you in particular, they suspected you of killing him or participating in a murder. That kind of has to stick with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't quite understand why they would suspect, me in particular. Him and Alan Dallas didn't get along great. I've always had a lot of, I always thought highly of Travis,
Travis, yeah. Travis, you guys were competitive, right? You didn't always get along. Sometimes got into shoving matches and shouting matches, things of that sort.
Yeah. Me and Alan had a few, what I'd call arguments. The only real fist fight was between Alan and Mike. But John and I really got along. I think it was the lawmen who were zeroing in on. Well, actually, what John said was that every crewman had their own little lawman trying to push at him to fess up.
Oh, like there was a cop assigned to each one to get them to break them?
Well, that was when we were doing the search. I know I was with a group of people, the search the next day looking for Travis. I was with a group of people, and I did have a deputy with me who kept asking me, hey, you just tell us where the body is, and man, we can all go home, and we won't have to do this anymore. And, I don't know if, I really don't know if the other ones, we were kind of separated.
John, we heard Steve's explanation of what was going on in the truck after this weird incident. Why don't you tell us what was going through your head? Were you scared like everybody else?
Oh, I was terrified. I had a lot of adventures in my life, and a lot of, and nothing can compare to that because, you're looking at this thing and it's absolutely perfect. You know what I mean? If it had been a group of guys or an animal, something like that, attacking us or something like that, you stand a chance. But looking at this thing, I knew immediately that, there was nothing we could do. We were helpless against it.
Steve has described the town as sort of divided. I'll go to him in a second, but first I want you to tell me, how did it evidence that way? I mean, how did you know the town was divided? Was it just kind of a whisper thing, or everywhere you go people would point and talk about it, or what?
Well, at that time, I was pretty rowdy. I went out and I partied a lot. I went to the bars and stuff, and I didn't know if I was going to a bar, if I was going to, somebody going to buy me a drink or want to fight, or they would have. I got a lot of people that constantly, say, "Oh, they're going to find Travis, and you guys are all going to prison," and they thought we were. I'm not quite sure what they were thinking. They seemed, it was a tough bunch of guys, they're out there, they worked hard every day, and they were all pretty strong, everybody was quite physically capable of doing what they were assuming we did, but that's not, I had a real hard time dealing with it, because I'm not that kind of person, I wouldn't never murder anybody or something, and one of the crew members, one of the people I worked with, and somebody I'd known since my teenage years, I couldn't quite understand, that's basically, I left the area because of it, and went somewhere where nobody knew who I was or nobody knew about the incident, and I never talked about it for many years,
Steve, the same question about how the town was divided. How did it manifest itself? How did you know? Same kind of thing? Just wherever you go, people are talking about it?
Yeah. Pointing fingers, and, you know, people be talking and look at you as they're talking to each other as you walk by. And most of the people there that I ran into thought we killed him. You know, they thought we... they didn't think I killed him because I was the youngest one, but they thought I was covering up for the rest of the guys.
Travis, after you come back, I mean, after it's clear that you haven't been murdered, what is the reaction then? Because they still suspect you guys are up to something, don't they?
Well, yeah. People were desperate to explain it away any way they could, and basically they threw everything but the kitchen sink at us. You know, and a lot of the theories that were coming at us were mutually exclusive. You can't believe that and that, but some of these theories that didn't agree with each other, that contradicted each other, were coming from the same people. It was just crazy how, you know, basically, you know, everything they could think of. And it really says more about the motives of the people who are making the attacks when it's got nothing to do with the facts. And you know, it's kind of like the urine sample that the doctor examined. You know, there were no drugs in it, so, well, then maybe it wasn't really my sample. But since there were no ketones in it, suggesting no starvation, then they flip-flop and say, well, then that's proof of, you know, something else. So, you know, they're using the same evidence in a flip-flopping kind of way that it was just crazy, you know.
Same thing with the polygraph tests, right?
Well, you know, at the time that the crew passed the test, the president of the American Polygraph Association stated that the odds were over 1,000,000 to 1 of that many people passing a test on the same issue and there being any kind of, you know, testing error. Because, you know, there is a small amount of error. But, you know, now there's over 16 past tests. So who knows what the odds be. You know, I've taken and passed 5 different tests from 3 different examiners, you know, all of them top-notch examiners. But it seems that no matter what, no matter how much evidence there is, there's always going to be people who will try to knock it down. No amount of proof, no amount of evidence is enough for them.
You wrote in your book, even if I could have brought back some piece of physical proof, there were some hardcore disbelievers who still would not accept it, meaning like a chunk of a flying saucer or the object that you used to wave them off.
Yeah. It just seemed like nothing was enough. And it's really not that they were disbelieving. I really think some of these people had an agenda that, you know, they might have even actually secretly believed it, but were just attacking it for some other motive.
Did there come a point, maybe John, I'll ask you this question first, and then Steve, then Travis. Did there come a point where all of you from the crew got together and said, we need to stick together on this, we need to prove our story? Not so much because we're in trouble, but to prove it for our own mental well-being. John?
Well, you know, I don't remember a situation like that. At the first we were all there, you know, backing it up. But, you know, I mean, like I said, you know, I it wasn't very long before I had enough, and I was ready to go. You know, I was ready to get out of there. I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I do admire, you know, Travis, and, you know, for all these years for standing there and telling the truth. I'm a little ashamed that I didn't do it, you know, but you know, that's the only reason I will do interviews now is because, I mean, he stood there and told the truth about the thing the whole time, you know, and, you know, I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't. But I don't think
these guys have anything to be ashamed of. And, you know, every place I've talked where anybody even made the suggestion that these guys were, you know, less than courageous in taking off it when they did, I got to tell them.
Where do you get the we at?
You got no reason for criticizing these guys because, you know, I think that they were, you know, pretty courageous in the way they handled it.
I didn't say we. I said me.
I meant
I'm the one. You know, I went off. You know, I got away from it. I didn't say everybody else. I don't know what everybody else did.
Yeah,
because I was gone.
It really wasn't that collaborative. You know, in a lot of ways, it wasn't a group of buddies, you know, that would get together and really unify that much. You know, we were all just out there because of the job.
Right. So let's go back to the critical moment, and I don't want to belabor this, and if you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to, but, you know, this craft has just zapped Travis, your coworker, with this beam. You think he's dead. You all take off. Is there guilt about that?
Well, it's good. We did not take off. Mike Rogers took off.
Right.
We were in the pickup. We had no choice.
Well, how did you feel about going back?
We all decided to go back to look for him. It was the right thing to do. Besides, we seen it take off. We knew it was gone.
You know, I don't. Mike was terrified. You know, just same as the rest of us. He took off, and Mike was pretty much the leader of the group. When he pretty much is the one who decided to go back. Travis and him were great buddies. You know, and that was his friend back there. He was one of our crew, one of us. It was a job. You know, we all just worked together. We didn't hang. You know, some of us hung around together off of the job, but most of us went our separate ways at the end of the day. You know, and but he was one of us. You know, and you know that to me is why we went back. You know, I mean, I was scared to death to go back. I didn't really want to, but you know, I mean, that's what we had to do.
Well, I'm just a guy who read the book and saw the movie, but I think you showed remarkable courage. I think your reaction initially was perfectly natural and understandable. The fact that you went back a few minutes later to go look for him, it showed remarkable courage. And
well,
you know,
I wasn't talking about that courage at that moment. I was talking about after he was gone, after we took a lie detector test, after he come back and that, I was talking about my own personal courage that I got away from I got away from what was going on about what had happened. You know, I didn't want to deal with that. You know, I mean, going back and looking for him, that's what you got to do. You know, but I mean, dealing with all the people, the questions, the accusations, and that. I just wanted to get away from that.
John, you're only here a couple more minutes in this segment, so I want to ask you a little bit and then get to Steve and Travis about the movie. Steve had told us he didn't even realize there was a movie being made until he saw Travis on television talking about it. When did you first see it? I guess I should ask.
I was living in Blythe, California. I was contacted about it. It was before they started the production. I did go to Phoenix, and I can't remember the guy's name. Tracy Torme. Anyway, those people had contacted me and asked me to come to Phoenix and try to find some of the others. Because a lot of the times people who were on the crew were people I brought up from Phoenix. Like Dwayne Smith. He was one of them. There was several others over a long period of time that I brought up with me that worked on the crew, and I was from the same neighborhood Dwayne was from, so they contacted me. They're trying to get everybody together to sign, the what do you call it?
Releases.
The releases to but I couldn't find Dwayne. Nobody knew where he was, and so I knew of several months before the movie was released,
And what was your impression of the movie and how you were treated by Hollywood? And then we'll get the same question for the other guys.
Well, I didn't get along with Tracy Torme, and I always assume that's part of the reason my name isn't mentioned in the movie, But once I could not find that guy, I was pretty much just left there in Phoenix, found my own way back home to California,
And did you saw the movie, right? What'd you think of it? You saw the movie. What'd you think of it?
Well, now when I saw the movie, I'd already talked. I talked to Travis, and he had told me, his experience after he had awoken on this craft, you know, and that, and the movie, it was kind of, well, it showed kind of his idea, you know, in a way, you know, like it kind of, when he woke up in the movie, when he woke up, he's covered by that membrane. He had mentioned once he felt like he was kind of enclosed. I mean, not like in something like it showed in the movie, but he was kind of enclosed, you know, or held down, you know, and he struggled to get up, you know. You know, it's just, I mean, if they'd have made a movie about, you know, just exactly what happened, it would have been about 15 minutes long, you know, I mean, because Travis wasn't awake that long during, you know. So, you know, I mean, and our experience with it wasn't that long either, you know. So if they made a movie about exactly what, you know, just what had happened. I mean, some of us are kind of far-fetched. I mean, like showing us in a bar in Heber. I mean, there wasn't a bar in Heber, you know, and, you know, things like that, you know. I mean, you know,
I'll ask the other guys about the Hollywood connection. I've just got about a minute left with you, John. Is it a positive experience in your life? Negative? Somewhere in between?
What,
the whole thing?
Oh, man. You know, I would say the experience itself was positive. The things afterwards weren't, you know.
So the encounter with...
You're never going to see something like this again in your whole life. You know, I don't care, you know, what you do, you know, or whatever. You're never going to experience something like that again. You know, it's something, you know, I mean, I'm glad that I was there to experience that. I'm sorry, you know, that the way it turned out, you know.
All right, John Goulet, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. I know this is not something you like to do, but I appreciate your input into this story. I want to talk more about the Hollywood experience with Travis Walton and Steve Pierce and bring Yvonne Smith in for a look at the bigger picture, including cover-up issues, disclosure issues, and where this story fits into all of that. Stay with us, everyone, on Coast to Coast AM. We're talking with Travis Walton, Steve Pierce, and Yvonne Smith about an amazing series of events back in November 1975. An amazing encounter and then subsequent events that were very trying for the people involved, including their encounters with Hollywood. We'll get into that part of the conversation, then expand the story to get into issues such as disclosure and cover-up right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Travis, my experience with Hollywood, both movies and TV, is don't believe anything that anyone says. Until you see it on the screen and it turns out how they said it was going to turn out, you can't believe them. What's your experience been like?
Well, you know, what happened with Fire in the Sky, you know, it started out okay. I'd turned down a lot of offers, but I was finally persuaded by Tracy Torme that he was going to, you know, do it serious and stick to the story and everything. And I'm sure that was his intention. It was only when the producers became alarmed about another production that actually Tracy himself had done, depicting these kinds of beings. And they were just so, you know, freaked out that there were, you know, these creatures had appeared in public already, and it was a TV series, that they insisted that that all be changed, that whole sequence be rewritten, or there wasn't going to be a movie. So that was the only thing that finally, you know, made Tracy give up on trying to stick to the, you know, the script that Tracy originally turned in was much more accurate than what turned out.
Yeah, he's a pretty serious student of this subject and is pretty widely respected among prominent researchers. What was prominently different in the movie that kind of bothers you?
Well, you know,
it was darker, right?
Yeah, it was darker and more negative, and you know, it's only in more recent years that I've come to realize that, you know, the negative perception that I had at the time, it might not have been warranted. That, basically, they might have been actually just trying to revive me, and so, their overall intentions could have been a lot more positive than I thought. Just the situation of being in such pain and having the suffocation and the claustrophobia of the tight surroundings, and all those things combined to make me react in a very much more frightened way than I would have, and that made me think of it as a lot more negative than it might actually have been.
You ever taken it further and thought, gosh, I wish that had happened again, I would react differently?
Yeah, but you know what? The only thing I can do over is the movie, so I'm trying to get a remake. And
really?
The idea of telling it closer to how it really happened. And so...
and is somebody biting on that? You got some nibbles?
There's a little bit of interest, and, there's been a huge resurgence in interest worldwide. I'm getting emails from everywhere, and there's a lot of shows that are going to be coming out soon.
Well, you seem a lot more at ease with yourself and the story and the sequence of events these days than maybe you were a long time ago.
Yeah, I've just had to come to terms with, there's a certain number of people that are just never going to accept it no matter how much proof there is. And, it's really hurt them more than me. And, that's just not a rationalization. That's really the way it is, because here's a really profound truth that can affect your life in a constructive way if you can make this fit into trying to make some kind of sense of the universe. But if you want to deceive yourself about something and believe something is not true that is true, you're the one who's lying to yourself. So, I can only feel sorry for people like that. Ultimately, no, I'm not claiming that doesn't bother me and it doesn't have a negative effect on my life. I'd much rather I wasn't treated the way I've been treated by some people. But, you can't have it all. The acceptance has grown. Things have changed.
Let's talk about... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, back when this happened, they didn't know of a single planet outside the solar system. That's all changing now with Kepler and identifying literally billions of planets. They're virtually certain exist in our own galaxy.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit with Yvonne. Yvonne, you struggle for credibility in this field. I can't imagine, though, no matter what kind of proof, that you're ever going to have mainstream science take this seriously, give it credibility. You have a case like this with these 7 witnesses. Their stories have held up, that stood the test of time. They passed the polygraph tests. Their story's consistent. Everything seems to support what they did. People have attacked it from every angle and haven't been able to put a dent in it. And yet, you tell somebody this story, a scientist type, they'll think you're crazy.
And that's unfortunate, George. I mean, it's left up to people like myself to do the in-depth research with these cases. I don't think it is ever going to be enough. If we start getting, sharper pictures, detailed pictures of these UFOs, because everybody now has cameras, our technology has changed dramatically. It's still not going to be enough, because now we have Photoshop and, things can be done on the computer. That's made this field, being in this field, a little bit more difficult as well. We have to sift through all of that. Which ones are the hoaxes? Which ones are the fakes? Which ones are the real ones? And I deal with a very personal side of this. And I sit here and I was listening to this. First time I've heard John describe his side of the story, and Steve, and had them to listen to them from their point of view is just. It's compelling to me, because, I'm just eyeball deep in this work, and, what happened to Travis and everybody, it's just I don't even have words for it. These people were traumatized to begin with. You know, they described the crap. They didn't know what it was. You know, Travis goes out there, he gets zapped. And then these poor guys go into town to try to report this, and they get traumatized again and again and again. And then Travis comes back. Obviously, these guys didn't murder him, and he gets traumatized again. You know, and this is what happens with people who have had these experiences, and this is why I established Post Encounter Resource Organization, a support group, 20 years ago, because once my clients walked out of my office, they had no one to talk to, not even a spouse many times, family members, and certainly not coworkers. But as Travis mentioned, and it's very true, things have changed, and we're trying to bring this out into the open more and more. You know, get it out of the closet. And, you know, why in 2012 are people still worried about losing their jobs because they had a UFO sighting, George? You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. And much less, I mean, my God, they can't talk about having an encounter with an alien being, even if they come back with overnight scars or marks on their bodies that heal over in, you know, a day or two. I mean, and I'm talking about geometric type scars and marks that I present in my lecture series, a triangular shape. You know, I ask my doctor friends, how do you bruise in a triangular shape? But whatever we have, George, I really, unfortunately, I don't think it's ever going to be enough. But this is why we do shows. Thank goodness for shows like this that you do, that George Norrie does. You know, we try to get out there in mainstream news, mainstream talk shows to keep talking about this, so people aren't traumatized over and over.
Steve, let me ask you, lasting effects. In particular, did you become a student of UFOs, ufology? Did you read up on this stuff to educate yourself after this experience?
No, I ran from it.
Yeah.
I had Philip Class chasing me all the time, and I was trying to hide from him all the time. And then I got on the road, and I tried to forget about it. My 12-year-old daughter is the reason I got back into it.
How's that?
Well, I broke my neck a couple years ago, and we were at home and watching TV, and I showed her the movie, and the movie doesn't show my name. I said, well, that's me right there. And she says, well, prove it, it's you. So I got a hold of Travis, and this is how it all started a couple years ago.
Travis, I'm going to come back to you for a second. I know you've had a lot of time to think about this. The assumption, I guess, is that these visitors were extraterrestrials. What about your thoughts on who they are, why they're here? Do you still think extraterrestrials is the best explanation?
Yeah, I think it's the most likely. You know, I don't know where they came from, and, you know, they could have come from the past, the future, another dimension. But most likely, extraterrestrials, you know, it's not that big a stretch. For some reason, mainstream science wants to insist that since we don't know how to go there, they couldn't possibly come here. And the arrogance of that we have arrived, and no, this is the modern age, and we know all there is to know, and there's limitations, and that can't be done. But, you know, Michio Kaku made the point in the media recently that, you know, stop envisioning the other civilizations being a little bit ahead of us. Think in terms of thousands or millions of years more advanced to us. You know, think of how far we've come in 20 years, and imagine what we would do in 1,000. And so, you know, the technology that they would have would just look like magic to us. And so that's the reason a lot of these events get cast as sort of semi-supernatural. And so that kind of adds to the resistance that people have to believe these kinds of things, because they think of them as some kind of a, you know, as a monster, or, you know, and whenever I'm given talks and I say, well, you know, it's more like they're just these very different people that don't look anything like us from way over there and that we know so little about, you know, that doesn't really get a very warm reception for some reason. For some people, the appeal itself of the subject is in something that's sort of quasi supernatural or religious.
Address for me for a moment the issue of cover-up. You and Steve shared stories about how media came in and spread wild stories and lies, and there were attacks on your credibility, and then Phil Klass shows up. I just wonder if you have a feeling that some of this is organized, that there is an ongoing effort. The idea of a conspiratorial cover-up is one of the pillars of modern ufology, and I just want to see where you fall on that issue.
I used to be kind of ambivalent about that, but as time goes on, I'm more and more convinced that there has been a concerted, organized, deliberate attempt to suppress it by, casting disinformation. Some of the stuff that I researched and documented and refuted thoroughly years ago still exists on the Internet. The skeptics who put this stuff out are perfectly aware of the stuff that completely discredits what they've got out there. But when I try to post on there, they won't allow it. So they're disinformationists. They're deliberately presenting something that they know has no credibility. So, yeah, I think that there's an active effort to discredit this, and I agree with the idea that the government is never going to voluntarily come forward and say, okay, all right, enough people complained about this that we're going to give in. No way, that ain't going to happen. That would be too much like saying, okay, well, we were lying then, but now we're telling the truth. Their credibility would evaporate.
Well, we're on the same page on that. Yvonne, same question for you. Do you see evidence in your particular field, the abduction research, that there's a hand of someone involved to make it less credible?
Oh, absolutely. I know whatever element that is within the government, there's been a definite campaign in discrediting people that have had sightings and of course abductions. It happens in so many cases, and for instance, I was just reading again about Vicki Landrum and Betty Cash. I think this happened in Texas when they spotted that diamond-shaped object in the sky, and they actually suffered from radiation poisoning, and they couldn't get any cooperation from anybody. And Betty Cash wound up with cancer, and she eventually passed away, unfortunately. And I know Stan Friedman had investigated this case, but it's ongoing. I mean, obviously, that element of our government has been very successful in downplaying and discrediting witnesses all these years. And, we still see, some of the newscasters when they report on someone had a sighting, and, of course, they don't report on it very often. Of course, people have sightings every day, but it's always reported tongue-in-cheek. And that's not including you, George. I mean, I know I've known you for many years, and I've always respected you and your work, but I've just, I watch, these other newscasters over the years, and they never seem to handle it seriously. Just only a handful that I had the privilege of working with had handled it in a very respectful manner. So, but I agree with Travis. I agree with George Norrie and you, where, our government is never going to come out and admit that they've been lying. People will always ask me, what do you think? You think we're going to know the truth? And I just said, don't hold your breath. Really, it's going to happen. I mean, there may have to be a mass sighting all over the world. And then even when that happens, they may try to explain it away. Who knows? It's just it's just not disclosure. I know there's people that are working very hard for disclosure, but I just don't think it's going to happen.
Well, we're on the same page on that. I don't think they would ever disclose. I think they painted themselves into a corner with too many lies over the years. And as somebody told me one time, if it turns out to be true, people would go to jail, you know?
Right.
Well, I figure there's only one of two ways that official acknowledgement could occur, and both would be against their will. One would be, like Yvonne suggested, some sort of a big, major event over some major population area, like a crash into outside a city or something that there's just no covering it up, or some kind of a WikiLeaks sort of whistleblower, somebody who just is on the inside that grabs the files and runs with them and brings them to the public. But barring those two very unlikely events, they're not going to fess up.
Yeah, I think even a WikiLeaks kind of thing, there have been whistleblowers who've come forward and talked about it. And, you know, it's like people see it as the movie of the week or something. Well, that's interesting. Or they read the story and then go back to their lives because there are more pressing things in their lives than to think about this.
Can you imagine? I mean, those people that have been whistleblowers, George, have also been discredited. You know, their credentials have been discredited. So, I mean, I think it just has to be something absolutely major, as Travis was saying too, where there's just no denying it.
Yep, I agree. Travis Walton, Steve Pierce, and Yvonne Smith are my guests. We open up the phone lines coming up. I'm sure you got some questions for them. Stay with us, everyone. John Denver taking us into the break. We're talking with Travis Walton, Yvonne Smith, and Steve Pierce about the night that lives changed and Travis's life, sort of his world turned upside down. Right after this, we go to the phone lines with your questions from my guests on Coast to Coast AM. Going to the phones, Pete in Pittsburgh on the East of the Rockies line. Good morning, Pete. What's on your mind?
Yes, an honor to be on this radio program. I was just wondering what Travis thought of the movie The Fourth Kind. Personally, I had an experience very similar, being electrocuted in a way, multiple hands holding my body down against my will, and the feeling of helplessness, even after praying to God. I don't feel abducted, though. So The Fourth Kind, and that's all. Thank you.
All right, Pete. Travis, I don't know if you've seen that movie or not.
Yeah, I actually did go to see it, and it kind of had me going there, but I checked with, I guess the consensus among researchers is that it was not real, that that was just actors. They knew of no research, investigators, or any cases that matched what was in that movie.
Yvonne, is that your feeling?
Oh, definitely. I did some research about this case because I thought, oh my God, if this is a real case, I want to travel to Nome, Alaska, and talk to some of these people. But I'm thinking that if this was such an extraordinary case, I really do think those of us that have been in the field for many years would have known about it. But there was no such doctor and no such case. And in fact, I had clients calling me and emailing me because they were so alarmed by the portrayal of the hypnosis sessions. I mean, it really frightened them. And to me, they resembled more of exorcisms than they were hypnotic regression sessions. And I assured, the people that called me that does not happen. In hypnosis, you're not in danger. It was just, unfortunately, it was, they portrayed it in a documentary fashion, but it was not real, not a real case.
It freaked a lot of people out, people who've had similar experiences. Travis, I want to ask about your health. Yvonne had mentioned the Cash Landrum case that ended badly for at least one of the people involved, something that sounds like radiation poisoning. What about your health long term? Any kind of lingering consequences?
Not really. It's actually kind of the opposite for me. Just been really, really healthy.
Well, it just makes me wonder what that beam was.
Well, whatever was present at the site had an effect on the trees that were growing there that was positive. But I was just talking to a technician here recently who was saying that the military has some kind of a long-wave antenna that they use to communicate with submarines that they actually discovered was having that kind of an effect on the growth of the trees where this antenna was erected. So I was kind of really intrigued about that. That's something I'd never heard about before.
You're saying that in the area where this happened to you, that there were positive, like the foliage grew more?
Yeah, you know, and this was proven through growth ring analysis, and there's even been some follow-up to that it was quite pronounced. And on top of that, recently I recovered from the center of the site a core sample out of a tree that was cut down the year before. You know, we were cleaning up the logging damage from the previous logging contract. So this tree was, you know, I haven't finished counting the rings, but it was, you know, in excess of maybe 250 years old. And what it did was show a uniformity in the growth ring for, you know, over 2 centuries that shows that there was no kind of climatic variability that would account for the really extremely thick growth rings that occurred in the trees immediately after the incident.
So you've been back to the site. It's still there. You can find it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's quite interesting that this growth rate thing, some of the trees were killed by a forest fire that went through there. And we discovered that in 2 different species, fir and ponderosa pine, that the rapid growth segment on the tree, after the tree had died, was more resistant to rot. The thinner growth rings, what you would expect the exact opposite. The slow-growing trees have a higher percentage of minerals and or just resist decay to a higher degree, and rapid-growing plants, you know, like underbrush and stuff like that, rots down very quickly. But in the case of these trees, that rapid growth material resisted rot to a remarkable degree. It's still solid, whereas, you know, the normal growth is what's rotting first.
You're going to have to update the book and add that as a chapter, or at least some footnotes.
Yeah. There's a number of very interesting discoveries that I'm going to put together into a final edition.
Anything else you want to share, or you're saving that for the book?
No, well, I'm not saving it. It's just ongoing research. It's not finished. So there's a lot of, you know, interesting stuff that's come out even after here 35 years. New stuff.
West of the Rockies, Patrick in Washington. Good morning, Patrick.
Hey, George. Hey, your partner last night, George, John B. Wells, was playing some excellent Jethro Tull.
Good for him. Good selection. What's on your mind?
Well, my question for Travis would be, I mean, since this event happened to him, I'm sure he's been into paranormal studies and stuff. And what would he say was the closest event, like true story behind the Amityville horror story? What's the closest event he would parallel to his?
Well, you know, I guess your intuition isn't accurate about my interest in paranormal. The truth is, I'm kind of like Steve in that department. It's actually kind of a subject I run away from to a certain extent. You know, inevitably people bring stories to me, and I pick up things by osmosis. But I have not done any study about other UFO cases or any kind of paranormal stuff.
Patrick, thanks for the call. First-time caller, John in Hollywood. Hi, John.
Hi, George. George, right? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, I have a question for Travis. And just a couple of questions. First of all, I'd like to know if he had any detail of the spaceship. And in 1975, when this happened, it was around the time the Close Encounter of the Third Kind came out. And also, if this has shaken his faith in any way. And is it possible maybe that these people in the Area 51, the government, has alien technology, they have aliens, and the guy that was on the spaceship that grabbed him by the arm, they say it was like a doc or something, but he didn't talk to him, but he was a regular person that he saw. that maybe the aliens are showing these people, are showing the government how to do it, how to abduct people or whatever. So I wanted to know about that. Thank you.
Okay, well, there's a bunch. Let's start with the faith question. Travis, I don't know if you're a religious guy to begin with.
Well, I consider myself a spiritual person rather than a religious person, and I don't think it's altered that. I see no contradiction in the existence of beings on other planets. Whatever forces, beings that are overseeing the universe or perhaps created it, are just as capable of creating something somewhere else as it was here. And I just see no contradiction. And, I've been approached by people from a variety of religions. And, some of them will say, this fits in with my religion, and here's how it does, chapter and verse, and, from a variety of religions, including Islamic religions. So, and then on the other hand, some will say, oh, this totally contradicts it, this can't be true. So you have as many opinions as there are people. And, I've even joked that there's 7 billion people on the planet, so there's 7 billion religions. And I really don't see a contradiction in what happened to me in any sort of spiritual faith.
One of the other parts that were raised by the caller is the idea that the saucer that you saw might have been influenced by movies. I think you sort of touched on this earlier, but you weren't really a big saucer movie buff in those days. This is something you saw on your own.
I don't really understand the question, but
well, I think he was implying that was around the same time that Close Encounters came out. I think Close Encounters came later, but that maybe you got the idea of what this saucer looked like from some movie you had seen.
I think it would go the other way. Dr. Hynek, who invested my case, was a consultant on that movie. So, if anything, Hollywood is influenced by the real life.
The other part of his question was about it being a military craft. Maybe this is one to ask Yvonne. The idea that our military cooperated with aliens, these so-called my labs, that military people participating in something like an abduction. Do you get those kind of stories?
I get some, and I know I've spoken to people that feel that they have had these my lab experiences. I mean, I really do not doubt that our military or the element of our government, whoever they are very interested in what experiencers go through. What information are they given? Why are they? What's the purpose for the medical experiments? I've been asked so many times by people, do I think that it's our government or our military performing all these abductions? And I say absolutely not, because it's on such a wide scale. It's worldwide. It's not just limited to the United States. I mean, this is worldwide, and we're getting reports from all over the world that are very similar, similar in description and so forth. So,
well, I
think that they are interested. I'm sorry?
I've considered the possibility that perhaps some of what is...
Some, yes. I was just going to say that they are interested in what, what these abductees go through. And
or that they're trying to muddy the waters a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
That could be, too, of course. Let's throw another monkey wrench in.
Well, it would be a handy cover story to cover up for some new sorts of craft they might have to blame it on the UFOs as a cover-up.
And you see what's really difficult, too, George, is that this could also be when people describe seeing military, and I'm not saying this is absolute, but it could be another screen memory of the beings are put these memories in the abductees' minds to make them think that humans are there, the military's there, when in fact it's really the alien beings. So that makes it a little bit more difficult too to separate, all that from fact and fiction. But no, I agree, Travis. Is that I think could be some people have had experiences with our own people, and
Okay.
to me, George, that's unforgiving. Because I think I could forgive the alien beings a little bit more because they have their agenda and we're still trying to figure it out. But if in fact our government and our military are performing some of these abductions or mind control or whatever they're doing, I think to me that's unforgivable.
You mentioned about the agenda. Travis, you've had time to think about what that agenda is. I wonder, what the heck was that craft doing way out in the middle of nowhere? I mean, it wasn't like they were waiting for you guys, you and Steve and the other guys to come by.
Well, some people think that's exactly what they were doing, but I kind of lend the idea that it was sort of an accidental encounter. But it was speculated that the tree growth was some sort of an accidental side effect of the beam or even the presence of the craft. But it's also possible that they themselves were doing some sort of agricultural experiment. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows exactly. Wildcard line, Ryan in Vancouver. Hi, Ryan.
Yeah, hi. I'll keep this brief because I know you guys are coming up to a commercial break. I think you already explained the Jalen Hynek, because him and his little goatee and just stroking it, in Close Encounters. Like Jerome Clark or even Dr. Jalen Hynek. I'm not sure whether you guys were interviewed by one of them, but I'm just wondering if you guys can answer maybe that, off the air. I'll just take the answer up there. You guys have a good night.
Yeah.
I've spoken extensively with Dr. Hynek and Jerome Clark and Stan Freeman and a number of researchers. Even Linda Howe actually came to the actual site and gathered samples in connection with the accelerated growth.
Did she conduct her own tests on him or have tests conducted?
I think that she was acting on behalf of the lab, but I guess that's kind of an ongoing effort.
Tell me this, Hynek, what was his attitude in the beginning? Because, he started out as sort of a skeptic. He was the skeptic for the Air Force. What was his attitude about you from the beginning?
Well, initially he was a little bit ambivalent. And I think that partly had to do with his sort of competitive relationship with the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, Carl and Jim Lorenzen. But, eventually he, took a stand and came down unequivocally in support of the case. He made statements to the media after visiting with me and my mother in Phoenix that Walton, quote, was not hoaxing. So,
and Yvonne, you've had experiences with all of the major research organizations. You're kind of a student of the subject. You know that years ago, that the whole abduction scenario was not welcomed by UFO researchers. They were very comfortable seeing saucers in the sky, but didn't want them any closer. Oh, absolutely. I was talking about this to, a few years ago. In fact, when MUFON had their big symposium in Denver, I forget how many years ago, but that's when James Carrion came in as the director when John Schuessler retired. And that was the first thing when I sat down with him. I said, you're coming in, taking over this organization. And I said, like it or not, the abduction side of this phenomenon is very real, and it's very major. Whatever's flying these craft, they're coming down here and interacting with, with Earthlings. And they, this was just a few years ago, George. So, to me, that's just unforgivable that the abduction side of it is to be ignored because, they're uncomfortable with it. But it's happened on such a large scale that really we really have to sit and take notice of what's going on. I mean, as I mentioned, I've done this for 21 years, and
we still don't have all the answers.
No, we don't, and I hope we get them while we're all still here. We're talking with Travis Walton, Yvonne Smith, and Steve Pierce. Harry Chapin taking us into the break with the only #1 song he ever had. Stay with us here. Much more to come, going into the home stretch here on Coast to Coast AM. The phone lines are full with your questions for my guests, Travis Walton, Steve Pierce, and Yvonne Smith. We'll get to as many of your calls as we can in our final segment coming up here on Coast to Coast AM. Going back to the phones in a second, Steve Pierce, we haven't heard from you in a while. I know you're not a student of this stuff, and you tried to put it out of your mind for a long time. When you hear the different directions the discussion goes and the different theories about UFOs, is it all sort of overwhelming for you?
Yeah, it's kind of different for me, yeah.
You have a hard time accepting it?
Accepting what I saw, or?
No, accepting sort of the bigger theories about aliens, abductions, where they might be from, why they're here, that kind of stuff.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I really wasn't into it until a couple of years ago. I don't even watch Star Trek movies or anything. I don't watch any kind of, space movies or nothing. So, and I don't read about nothing. I never read about them. So, this is all kind of new to me.
Well, you have a lot of people who are envious of you just for seeing what you saw. West of the Rockies, Sam in Montana. Hi, Sam.
Yes, hello. I was wondering, Travis, who played you in that movie? Who was the guy?
That was D.B. Sweeney.
Right. I saw the movie years ago. So it was the same movie. Okay. My main question is, I have this thing, and I see this light in the sky. A lot of people think it's a star, but it's like a big star, and it follows me. And if I'm walking, I can stop, and it will, readjust to stop with me and then stay there. I call it my friend in the sky. So somebody said it was Jupiter, and I'm like, no. So I was coming back from fishing with a friend of mine, and this thing is there. So we're driving, and I said, Jared, you see that thing out there? Watch. It'll stay right with us. It'll follow us. I go up to about 80, and it's right there even with us. And I said, watch this. I slow down to about 30. It slows down. It stays right there with us. I said, you see that, right? He's like, yeah, Sam, I see it, but I don't want to see it. It's freaking me out. Have you ever heard of something like that? Looks like a white light that follows you?
Well, it's possible that, the idea that it's following you is a kind of an illusion that, actually something very large at a large distance is far enough away to where your line of sight to it at one point on the Earth is going to be virtually parallel to a line of sight even a mile away. So you're always looking in the same place, even though the scenery between you and it is changing. So it gives the impression that it's following you.
Thank you.
That's not to say that it's not impossible that something is following you, but I'm just saying that there might be a conventional explanation for your perception.
Sam, thank you for that call. First-time caller, Clive in Long Beach. Hi, Clive. Good morning.
Good morning. This is to Yvonne. Early in the program, Travis and Steve and John all said that they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and they had no choice in the matter. And they also said that they faced their share of ridicule or skeptics. And I wonder, Yvonne, when you went to college, hypnotherapy college, did you intend to subject yourself to this type of secondhand smoke or guilt by association, knowing that you'd face criticism? And how long have you been doing this?
Oh, okay. Thank you for the call. I became interested in the field years ago. Gosh, in the late 80s, when my mother asked me to go with her to a Bud Hopkins lecture in Pasadena, California, and I was just intrigued by what he was presenting, and the fact that hypnotherapy regression was used, and hypnotherapy was a great tool to retrieve hidden memories. I was very fascinated. But I started going to college to learn this skill and and take psychology classes and so forth to receive my certification, I really was interested in working with cancer patients and people who are suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. When I was referred a couple of these cases in the beginning of my practice, the people that were exhibiting post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms that were abducted, that felt they may have had an encounter with aliens, were exhibiting the same symptoms of somebody who had suffered a terrible car accident or another type of trauma in their lives. And I thought this was quite interesting. You know, PTSD is PTSD. And, you know, I've been doing this for 21 years, and yes, those of us who have done this work, we've put our necks out on the chopping block. I've spoken to my colleagues about this over the years, but we all agree that once you get into the field, and if you're meant to be in it, there really is no turning back. Since 2012 started, I've had numerous new cases come to me, and for being January of the new year, I've been extremely busy. So there are people out there that need to know the truth about what happened to them.
Clive, thanks for the call. Jeff in Portland on the wildcard line.
Hi.
Hi, Jeff.
I would like to thank you for taking my call, Mr. Knapp. And Mr. Walton, I've been in and out all of those towns in Arizona. In fact, I broke down between Bisbee and Sierra Vista there, and I met a direct descendant of the person who founded your town. And after I saw Fire in the Sky, I took the opportunity to question everyone from that area about that incident. And I want to tell you, sir, what they say when no one else is around and what they say when other people are around is very different. I wanted to lend you my support. I'd never had an incident like that happen to me, but the resistance that I met just even talking about it was, I just had to start saying to people that what you just said to me was just ignorant. But my question is, and I
wait a second. Wait, Jeff. What are they saying?
Around other people, I mean, there's like, I don't want to get into the religious thing, but there's a pre-approved answer for everything that happened in that area during the time. But when these people are alone, I mean, this man's last name was Flake that I was talking to that night. I looked him directly in the eye. Okay,
I'm sorry.
Directly in the eye, and he looked at me back, and I know that he knew. And I was a very young person when I discovered all of this, and I know that you encountered the resistance that you did. I want to thank you for what you did. I'm grateful for you because you've probably affected myself and scores of other young people who probably would have just dismissed this as foolishness. But my question for you, sir, is why? I mean, I personally would have been paralyzed with fear if I was in that truck and not ran under that thing. Why did you do that?
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. It was just, something real impulsive that I do feel that I was acting under my own volition. But like I said, it's possible that if they're controlling your mind, they can make you think it was your idea. But still, I was just curious and assumed.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I've literally waited like 2 decades to lend you my support and never ever thought this call would happen. But like I said, congratulations for not only making it through the hell that happened after that, but getting to this point. And thank you for taking my call, sir.
Which Flake did you talk to?
His name was... I don't know if I should mention that on the radio.
That's probably not fair. But, there's hundreds of them. And
there's thousands of them.
He was direct. His grandfather founded the town.
Well, that could be all of them.
There's a lot of them.
There is an orthodoxy locally, and, people are afraid to be supportive, although privately they acknowledge.
I was in that car with him, and I know what he was. He was looking in my face, and I know he was a religious man, but he knew what was up, and so did I. And, I just got the feeling that he accepted it totally, but had no understanding of it because it had nothing to do with what his life was. And that's what many young people that I encountered from that area are saying. They have these these generic, broad sweeping words that they use, weird or strange, whatever. It's just because they don't have the words to say what's on their mind. That's all.
Jeff, thank you. Appreciate that. I guess he's making reference to the town as Snowflake, and it was founded by two families, right? The Snows and the Flakes.
Yeah, true, and that's a family name. We even have a congressman with the last name of Flake who's also a descendant.
And they were two cops that at the time that were named Flakes, too.
Glenn Flake.
They were in Snowflake at the time, and back when we saw the UFO.
Portrayed by a character named Blake in the movie, and then the town marshal was Sanford Flake. So, it's one of the more common founding families.
Jim in Alberta on the wild card line. Hi, Jim.
Hey, good evening, George and Travis Walton, our Lego Man in Space. Have you seen the video? Have you seen that? It's been on the internet. Coast to Coast has it up on their site, too. Students set a hot air balloon, helium balloon, a weather balloon up into space or on the edge of space. You look at the video online, just after about a minute and 1 second, there's something in the background moving, and it looks like a flight path, not a re-enter. It's too high for airliners and too low for space junk, but it's worth looking. My question is, Trav, have you ever done any, like Betty and Barney Hill, any controlled hypnosis?
One time.
Really? How did that work out? How did it...
It was successful. The intent was to, for the first time, allow me to recount the entire events of what happened. It was just so traumatic and so fearful for me that I couldn't get it out before.
Was that documented or videotaped or anything at the time? Or?
Yeah, that was taped. It was audio taped, and also witnessed by my brother and some other a number of researchers.
Yeah.
So.
That's cool. Check out the Lego Man in Space, the Canadian video. It's been on CNN. It's been all over the place. Just take a look in the background. It's that object that goes from right to left. It is going fairly fast, but it's not a re-entry. And it's just something that shouldn't be at that altitude. The kids put a video camera in the styrofoam cooler with this helium weather balloon, and, man, it went way, way up until it burst. And this object in the background behind, there's a little Lego man standing there holding a flag, Canadian flag, and the camera's on all the time. And you can see this thing move from the right to left. It starts at about 1 minute, 1 second, and lasts about 3 seconds. But it's something that just shouldn't be there.
That's bizarre.
It is. It's different.
If it's not that Photoshop, though, Yvonne was talking about.
No, it's not, because you've seen, NASA stuff and whatnot. And, I live on an Air Force base in Cold Lake here up in Alberta, and, I've been around the airplanes and fighters for 30 years, and I saw this, and I just went, whoa. The hair on the back of my neck stood up a bit. So.
Hey, Jim, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. East of the Rockies, Matt in Florida. Hi, Matt.
Hey, guys. How y'all doing?
Okay.
Just got two questions, basically, pretty much for Yvonne and Travis, I guess. First is, what's your opinion of the Ancient Aliens show and the idea that aliens visited us in the past and maybe were mistaken for gods, and maybe even the founding of a lot of our religions? And the other question was just basically the idea that there's this view that, aliens, if they exist, they either have to be all good or all bad. And I've been hearing this thing lately that's like, where in nature do you see that? Where in humanity do you see that? You see more of a mix where, you got some good people, you got bad people, you got a mix, and just those were my two questions.
Yvonne, why don't you start?
Well, I think the Ancient Alien show is an excellent show, and it's absolutely thought-provoking. I've seen a few segments of it, and how they go and they're talking about the pyramids, and I can't even, it's so much to absorb, but I don't see why that wouldn't be true. That they've been here for eons. I've been contacted by one of the producers of that show, so we're supposed to be taping a segment for that show in the near future, which I'm very excited about, because I think it's an excellent, very credible show. And I'm sorry, George, what was the second part of that question?
Well, as part of that, he was questioning about the idea that aliens help create our religions, is going along with the question about the show.
Oh, and about the good and bad. That was part of it that struck me. You know, I'm asked all the time when I'm lecturing, you know, are they good? Are they bad? I think, you know, human nature wants it to be black or white. And really, in my experience with all of this, I feel at this point they're neither. I mean, they have an agenda. They have their agenda. They're carrying it out for whatever reason we still don't know. They do bring people back, just like they did with Travis. They may be traumatized because these people don't know what is happening to them. And but we, you know, there's, as the caller said, there's a mix in, you know, with Earthlings down here, that there's good, bad people, and that's how it is, I feel, with the alien beings. I mean, there has to be, I mean, hundreds of different species and types, and the scary part is, that the unnerving part is that we don't know what their agenda is. That's the problem.
Travis, same part of the question?
I agree, and, you know, there's probably as many different species as there are planets, and there's a great tendency to try to lump them together. Well, they generally have this sort of a description, so they're just calling everything that remotely resembles them as grays, and remotely resembles this other type as reptilians or insectoid or whatever. But, you know, it probably runs the entire range, and we just tend to lump them together when they're actually distinct species, maybe not even coming from the same planet, or even, you know, much farther apart than that.
Yeah, it's hard to say there's an agenda. It may be several agendas. You know, the large question is whether we're ever going to know, whether we're being prepared for something, some kind of a long learning curve. I don't know. It drives me crazy. I've been at it for a while, and it drives me crazy that I think that while I'm here, I might not get the answers.
Well, let's hope we do.
Whether they're good or not, I mean, from their perspective, they're all good. But from our perspective, that depends on the degree to which their agenda, is friendly to what we would consider.
We got about a minute left here, Travis. I know you have a new edition. It's a new edition of Fire in the Sky that's out?
Yeah, it's a 2010 edition. It's updated, 26 pages longer than the earlier one, and that's available through my website, traviswalton.com.
Well, we've got a link on our site as well, and it sounds like you've got enough material to maybe add some more stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of new things coming up. It's amazing.
Well, I hope you'll come back and let us know if somebody bites about a new and improved version of the movie.
Yeah, I got a feeling it's going to happen.
Steve Pierce, I appreciate your patience and sticking with us and your candor in describing the events that happened to you. I hope it wasn't too bad for you.
It was pretty good. Thank you. Can I give a shout-out to somebody?
Go ahead.
To Dave Snill, I missed his name. Well, he's from the U.S., he's from the New Jersey UFO Congress. His name is David.
All right, Steve. All right, thanks very much. Yvonne, thank you. It's great to talk to you. It's been a long time.
Thank you. Yeah, I have my new book coming out this year, and we'll all be at the UFO Congress in February.
All right. Well, we've got your connections to your website as well. Travis, it's been too long in coming. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it was great to be on again.
My thanks to John Goulette, Steve Pierce, Yvonne Smith, Travis Walton, of course. New edition of Fire in the Sky is out. Thanks also to the folks at Premier, Nathan, Gina, and Tim Banal. And I'll be back next month. Good night, everyone.